Hello again. Today on Take Two, I am talking to Serge Fjetland, who is a 3D printing aficionado. And I don't know anything about 3D printing, so I am absolutely fascinated to learn what it is, why somebody does it, how expensive it is, and what the potential is. So Serge, just take it away. Tell me everything I need to know about 3D printing.
Yeah, great to talk to you. So I know a lot about, I have two different kinds of 3D printers, which I'm happy to talk about. But basically there's two different technologies in 3D printing. You have FDM, where you're laying down a thin bead of plastic, and over the course of hours, it's like drawing on a sheet of paper and then drawing over it and drawing over it. Each time you draw over it, it becomes a little bit thicker. The advantage of that is you can create larger objects, such as this little dice cage, and it you can get fairly good detail up to like 300 or 400 millimeters in size, something as big as a foot. People have gone so far to make full-size wearable Iron Man outfits, or Starship Trooper, Stormtrooper outfits, and then they paint them up and they have a full-size outfit, and those will cost up to like a couple $100 of material. The other big technology is called a resin 3D printing. You have a much smaller build print, but your detail can be a lot more fine. So in this case, people usually make things like Warhammer miniatures or Dungeon Dragon miniatures, or much more fine things. This is a little Warhammer figure, and at this point, they're almost like store quality. They're entirely smooth. Both style has its own big advantages. So I'm not sure if you're depending on what you're doing, you have to figure it out.
So how did you get interested in 3D printing in the first place?
So I've been fascinated with 3D printing basically since the technology started to mature in the early 2000s. However, I actually bought both of my initial printers off a friend who was getting out of it when they were getting on with their life. So I picked up both of his printers, and then since then I'm looking after a third friend's printer, which I have right here actually. So this right here, if the
it's kind of blurring a bit because I think you're in the background, so you might have to put it right in front of you.
So this right here would be an example of an Ender 3 3D printer. So you'll have your bed, which is the objects printed onto, and then you'll have your hot end, which is what actually heats up the plastic and melts it, and then the rest of it is just cameras and power supply. And this is where you'll hook a spool of your filament up to, and it'll print it off. And something like this will sit by itself very happily for days and days printing off the object.
So tell me something, if you wanted to 3D print, let's say a child's bicycle or a tricycle, would you print each separate piece and then you would bolt them together the same way you would if you bought a bicycle and parts from the store? How does that work?
So you'd have trouble printing something like a tricycle just because of the strength of materials. You can get higher strength materials such as a carbon fiber infused filament, but those are more expensive. But if you're printing off something like a small box, for example, you can either have ones where it prints off in several pieces and you put the hinge together and you put maybe a screw through that. But one big thing is you can do what's called in-place manufacturing, where I've printed off a box, which I don't have with me, but it has gears, it has a spring, it has all these different interconnected pieces, and it's all a single object. So it comes off the printer and you have a box which is self-latching with a spring. I printed off bands for your ears, which will protect your ears from the strains of wearing a mask. And these come off as a bunch of turtles all interlocked, and they're all hinged. So it's entirely up to you.
So you can actually 3D print things that have movable parts.
You can 3D print gears, you can 3D print springs, you can have these incredible objects that are pre-designed that have movable parts.
How much does it cost to do this?
So the actual materials of an object is quite low. A box about this big is probably no more than $1 of plastic, if that. The big thing when you buy something is the person's time and the effort to set it up. Because when you give me an object, you'll give it to me in what's called an STL file. And that is basically like a shape from a computer game. I'll then take that into what's known as a slicer, and it'll take the object and analyze and figure out how to print it. One slicer can have several hundred different options of wall thickness, infill, this type of infill. So you figure that out, you slice it, and then you take it to the 3D printer. And it can take, I've done prints that are up to 36 hours long. If it fails in the last couple of hours, then the entire object usually has to be restarted. So it's a very case-by-case scenario, which takes the cost amount, which takes into account both the material costs, as well as the printer wear and the time of the person, and just how long it's going to take, since something that prints faster is usually easier and more reliable to print.
So it sounds like you have to have some really good, I don't know if it's programming knowledge, but just the knowledge of creating that original file, or do you take an existing object and then it copies it?
So I don't have any of the 3D modeling knowledge, but there's an incredible wealth of files online. If you if you're looking for an object, if you search for the name and you search STL behind it, you'll often find it. Such as I've recently printed off some car parts for a friend, and I just looked up the name of his car part and searched STL, and I was able to find the holders for him. I've fixed various things around the house. You just search the object, and you find someone else has done the heavy lifting.
So, for example, what have you fixed around the house?
I printed off some gears for a salad strainer that I had. I've found the object and printed that off, and various things to like hang paintings. I had an odd-shaped one I was able to get done up.
So when you say that you printed off some car parts for a friend, again, going back to the tricycle, those wouldn't be the heavy duty strong parts. These are like little plastic brackets or things like that.
Yeah, these are more plastic brackets for sure. This in the case, it was holding off a gauge for him in his when he's driving, so you can see the pressure gauge.
Right.
My big interest has always been painting. I paint a lot of miniatures. So as an example, I'm currently printing off a science fiction ship from The Expanse. So when this is done, it'll be probably about 3.5 feet tall. Each layers prints off, and I paint it up layer after layer. And then by the time you're done, you're able to stack them off to whatever object.
Wow. Wow.
So it seems to be a very good for making both working parts, such as parts for your car, as well as props.
Okay, cool. So does this have the potential for you? I know you've got a day job that pays the bills. Does this have the potential to actually earn you money, or is it more just something that you enjoy doing?
I know of people that do make a large profit from it. Quite often they'll have what's often referred to as like a print farm, where they have a dozen different printers. For myself, I'm just trying to basically pay off the printers, and every time I make any money, they reinvest it and install new parts. So I haven't turned much of a profit from it, just furthering the addiction.
And so, for example, that printer that you had on the floor that you lifted up to show, how much would a printer like that cost someone?
An Ender 3 right now is about $350 Canadian.
Oh, so that's not bad. I was thinking it was in the thousands.
No, you can certainly get high-end printers, and there's basically no upper limit to how much you can spend. But you can get, if you're interested in getting into it yourself, you can get a decent little printer for under $300 or a middle line for $300 to $500.
Okay.
And then one of the great things is once you have a printer, quite often you can print upgrades to your printer. So you can kind of have this recursive loop where you're printing parts for your printer to print better parts for your printer.
Okay, it's kind of like the snake eating its own tail then.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. Serge, thank you so much for talking to me about this and on such short notice. I really appreciate it. And thanks for demonstrating some of the things that you can do. It's very cool.
Yeah, no worries. I always love spreading the gospel because it's absolutely fascinating to take just a bit of digital code and a couple hours later have dice in your hand or have objects. Or when I proposed to my fiance, I had a 3D printed a ring box for her.
Aw, that is so great. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for spending time with me.
Hey, well, have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye for now.